Just waiting for the camera to go on. We've got some remote friends who will be joining us. Awesome. Hey everybody, my name is Jeff Reichman. I usually kick off these hack nights by introducing our speaker, but tonight I'm going to be doing a lot of the talking. I'm going to try and move through this in about half an hour and then open it up for questions. You're here largely because you want to know more about election cybersecurity. Me too. I serve two roles standing here. One is as an organizer with Sketch City, so a lot of you are from Sketch City and are interested in civic tech. And I'm also the VP of program for the League of Women Voters in the Houston area, of which Linda Cohen is the president, and she's back there tweeting. And in that capacity, I'm chairing a study of election cybersecurity in Harris County. And so that's what we're going to go over today. Did anybody see this article this weekend in the New York Times? It was pretty profound. I don't really like reading off the screen, but I haven't run through this presentation before, so forgive me if I do that. But I really do want to read this because it's kind of small, but also because it's kind of important. What's happening is a PSYOPs operation, said Mac Warner, the West Virginia Secretary of State. That's what the Russians are running against us now, trying to erode confidence in our democratic process. We need to assure our citizens that we're aware of these attacks, that we have the assistance to counter them, and that when they do occur, don't panic, there are resources to turn to. This is a seismic shift in cybersecurity thinking. Oftentimes, cybersecurity is how do I put out the fire, sweep it under the rug, move on as fast as possible. It took Equifax 6 weeks to even tell the public that 130 million people were compromised. This is huge, and it's actually what this signaled to me was that government can take a leadership role in how to handle cybersecurity intrusions, specifically that when they do occur, we have to get ready for that. And I think before I go further, I'd love to go around the room, say our name, what we do for a living, and what our favorite coffee shop in Houston is. We always do something different. So my name's Jeff. I do this and consulting data stuff for a living. My favorite coffee shop is Mercantile Montrose.
I'm John Behrman. I'm with the League of Women Voters in the Montrose area, and I've been working in this lane as a Democratic Party official for almost 50 years.
What's your favorite coffee shop?
Along Madeline on South Shepherd.
That's a good one.
My name's Sarah Perkins, and I am a DAX configurator, a dynamic application security tester for White Hat Security here in Houston. And my favorite coffee shop is probably 111.
Cool.
I'm Mike Silverman. I'm from the Houston Chronicle, and I'm here to cover this as a possible story. And my favorite coffee shop is Black Wood Coffee.
It's a good one.
Oh, yeah.
Linda?
I'm Lizzie Cobb with the League of Women Voters. My favorite coffee shop is Dunkin' Donuts.
Northeast representative.
Gotta be from Boston. You like that?
Hi everyone, I'm Penny Shaw. I'm an attorney and I'm also with the League of Women Voters and with the Texas Democratic Women's Association in Harris County. And my favorite coffee shop is probably, there's a whole bunch of them, but I like Heights, EQ, and I like Slowpoke.
Cool. Where's Slowpoke? I haven't been there.
Yeah, it's hidden away. It's off of, it really is. It's off of West 34th and I think Alba.
Cool.
You can get to it though off the northeast turn.
Awesome.
Cool little place. Yeah, just Slowpoke.
Why don't we start from the back here and work our way up? Frank?
My name is Frank. I do, particularly do words, but it's more specifically I use something called Macromedia, which create databases of terminology. And my favorite coffee shop traditionally has been Salento in Rice Village, but now that's more of a dinner place. I would have to say Black Hole.
Cool. Judith?
I'm Judith Oppenheim, and I'm with the Bay Area League of Women Voters. I am a new board member, and I handle voter registration drives.
Congratulations.
My favorite coffee place is on Bay Area Boulevard, and it's called Bar Bazaar.
Cool.
My name is Evan. I'm a full stack developer. Someone focused on the database. I also help run the Houston Linux users group. My favorite coffee shop in Houston is Agora, which is probably the one that's open until 2 o'clock in the morning.
That's my favorite coffee shop to almost kill myself on the stairs.
It's great.
Yeah.
Especially with my hands full.
When coffee isn't enough, you have to stare.
Right?
I'm Randy Baxter. I usually just say I'm old, but since everybody is going a little bit further tonight, I'll say that I'm also the first vice president of the North Central Civic Association, which meets here on the fourth Monday of the month, and I'm part of the community leadership team for the Super Neighborhood 51, which meets here on the fourth Thursday of the month. And my favorite coffee shop is Croissant Brioche in the village.
Nice.
My name is Russell DePina. I run a cloud development group, software development group for electronics firm down in the Bay Area. I've got a few favorite coffee shops, but probably my two favorites are I like Agora, and I'm from Boston, so Dunkies.
Yeah.
I'm Meredith Maines. I'm a software designer in oil and gas. And I love coffee so much, but I guess my favorite would have to be Southside Espresso in Montrose.
It's a good one if you can get a seat.
I know, there's never any space, but if you buy a pound of coffee beans, you get a free drink. So
That's cool.
maybe so.
That's
That's
I'm Dan Monet. I'm a student at University of Houston, trying to become a programmer. So I have a favorite coffee shop, not because I really get coffee there, but because I do swing dance there, which is the Second Cup Cafe in the place.
nice.
So
We have several people who are involved in a Second Cup working on a Sketch City project around human trafficking.
oh yeah.
David?
I'm David Wilson. I'm a full-time software developer and part-time AV guy and civic hacker.
Nice. And one other point of business that I wanted to let you all know about before we get back into the presentation is that the week after Election Day this year, we are going to be putting together an Open Data Day during public comment for City Council. So if you have a story about open data, if you have something you'd like to talk about with open data, if you have a project that's based on open data, such as David's incident map, come to City Council and tell them how much you love open data. The city's starting to make a big commitment into it. They rebuilt the portal. They're hiring an FTE to manage the open data program. This is, yeah, I know, it's huge, right? It's all
Just
coming.
keep talking, just keep talking, keep talking.
So mark your calendars, and you'll hear more about that soon. So I want to talk to you about what we're going to cover today, and what the scope of the league study is, because this is a huge, huge topic. It's highly technical. It's evolved over the last 20 to 30 years or more. And it's also like a snowflake. It's different in every jurisdiction, even within Texas, and then Texas to other states. So I want to set some boundaries around what we're going to talk about. One is that, what does this ecosystem look like? Who are all the players involved? Two is, where does the League of Women Voters of the Houston area fit into this conversation? We're going to talk a little bit about what a study entails, because it's formal. What does this study entail? What do we hope to accomplish with it? And finally, and we'll spend the most time on how you can get involved, whether or not you have tech skills. If you have tech skills, there's certain things you can do. If you have other skills, there's other things you can do. Okay, so first, you've probably seen this face before. That's Stan Stanner. He's an elected official. That means that people vote for him and put him into office with that mustache. Stan Stanner runs the county. He's the county clerk. He is also the they have the election returns division. So when you get elections data, it comes from his office. They administer the elections in Harris County. There's also a tax assessor and collector in Harris Bennett. The tax assessor collector is responsible for registering voters. So between those two agencies, they administer kind of that full continuum of registration and actual voting. So if you want to know more about how close and crazy our Houston elections are, go to that elections division button right there, download some reports in beautiful PDF form, and crunch those numbers. Because it's very shockingly close how close our elections are. I wanted to kind of categorize it just to set some context. There's different types of people involved in this kind of work. The first are our researchers. You probably heard of Dr. Dan Wallach, and we're going to go over some of his research today. He's a national figure on election security, and he's based here at Rice University. And he gave the keynote at the last League member meeting in May. And he has done a ton of research around where the vulnerabilities exist. So these researchers give us best practices. They give us some long-term recommendations. And then there's journalists, like our friend Mr. Silverman here, who act as amplification. They help spread the message. They help marshal resources and get people aware of this study or whatever, aware of the problems. And they also help with investigative journalism as well. So there's a lot of really great investigative journalists out there working on this story. Our goal is to try and synthesize as much of that as possible between the long-term problem solving and the immediate term kind of investigations. And this is kind of an example of some of those folks. Dan Wallach does research at the Baker Institute. There's a center in Princeton called CITP. ProPublica is a very well-known open source journalism source. And Dan's on Twitter talking about all the latest crazes like blockchains. But really what this filters down into are people like you and me, citizens, advocates, people who can put on the day-to-day pressure to enact change. And in this case, in an elections study, it's not really day-to-day pressure as much as it is cycle-to-cycle pressure, and trying to line up election cycles, procurement cycles with staffing cycles and whatnot. We're also responsible for communicating a unified message around what we want the county clerk to do. And so that's really where the League of Women Voters of Houston fits in. Now the League is a nonpartisan organization. It's important to know we're not Republicans or Democrats when we put on our League hat. We're nonpartisan, but central to our mission is fair and free elections. And so this concept has taken on a partisan tone given our highly partisan times, but I just want to remind everyone it's okay to believe whatever you believe as long as you want fair and free elections. The League is your place to be. It's my little pitch for joining the League. So if you want to be involved in this study, you do have to become a member of the League, and it costs $70 a year? $70 a year. Okay.
Anyone can come and chat in our various discussion groups, but if you want to actually vote on the position that we're going to take and advocate for, then you have to do it.
Yeah, and they're some of the most amazing people in the world, so you'd be joining good company. So what is a League of Women Voters Houston study? We've done tons of studies. We have dozens of positions dating back in the 1960s. We try to thoroughly investigate an issue so that we can speak with one voice on it. For example, we have a position on fiscal responsibility for government, making sure that we don't spend more than we take in, or making sure that we have a balanced budget. Now, whether or not that actually happens each year, it gives members a vocabulary to be able to say, hey, you know what, we believe in a balanced budget, and I've got the League at my back supporting them. So we'd like to get somewhere in cybersecurity like that, to be able to speak with one voice. The two things to know about a study is that it contains a research component, which is what we're going to go over today, and a consensus component. So we cannot assume that even if we do our due diligence and have really good information, that the members are going to vote on it. They have to vote on it. They have to approve it. The board has to approve it. So there's a certain bit of not presuming the close that this is actually going to happen, and more about trying to educate other members and figure out through consensus and deliberation what that message really is. And we've been conducting studies for a very long time. I'd encourage you to go onto the website. There's a Google Sheet there with summaries of all of our positions and links to our studies. It's pretty remarkable how thorough they are, and you'll learn a ton about Houston that way. So the cybersecurity study, and the way in which we're defining the scope. So the way in which the League wants us to do this is we define the scope of the study. And this is about 98% there, but I'm interested in your feedback. We want to assemble local and national election cybersecurity research and best practices. And like I said, we have Dr. Wallach in our backyard, so it's not hard to assemble those best practices. The challenge is going to be in synthesizing them and figuring out what they mean for advocates. Our goal is to position these positions in ways that will last from year to year. So it's one thing to say, hey, you need to run your security patches. You need to make sure everything's up to date. That is perennial good advice. It's another thing to say you need to move from this machine to that machine, which is a one-time move and isn't really part of a lead position. It's not a specific recommendation like that. But if we looked at the technical underpinnings, and if there's a technical best practice that we should follow, that a machine should incorporate, then that's the type of thing that we can advocate for. If the study goes according to plan, if we're able to achieve consensus both within our committees, within the board, and within the larger member group, we can begin advocacy in May of 2018. And that's particularly important because there's a ledge session coming up in 2019. And I believe that I have to look up when the procurement cycle for these machines are, but it comes up once every 10 years. And I think we're halfway through a new procurement cycle without actually procuring anything. So our machines are at least 15 years old. So it's timing. How you can get involved. So I started brainstorming ways in which we could divide up some of this work. And this is really small print, and I apologize for that. But I'd like to kind of open it up for questions about what this is and how we're doing it, after kind of going through very briefly kind of these big buckets and soliciting ideas for other committees. The first is the machines. How are we testing them? What technology are they using? You know, how are we procuring them? What vulnerabilities exist? There's some really great research from Dr. Wallach, where he talks about, you know, all of our votes, think of it like a funnel. We vote on these machines and they go into another machine and everything's secure all the way down to one machine, one computer that contains a precinct's votes, let's say. That computer's air-gapped, so it's not connected to the internet. And that's great, that's secure, but it's deceptive, right? Because if you have some type of worm that's transmitted through a USB stick, then you're not protected at all. And in fact, that can travel from machine to machine, as he has proven. So there's some very basic, you know, you left the barn door open kind of vulnerabilities that are out there that are easy wins through the research, you know, that we can figure out. But then there's more difficult ones, like based on the recommendations and best practices, how should we go about procuring these? How should we combat a message like we don't have any money and we haven't budgeted for this, so we're not going to buy new machines because this stuff transcends normal budgeting. So the election machines committee is going to explore a lot of those issues and some of the things that we talked about last night in our unit meeting that John Robert brought up, which is ways in which we can use existing groups, such as the which one was it? The testing board, which is created by statute. How can we give them a vision for how it should work? How can we impart statistically significant studies to determine whether or not our voting machines are calibrated properly or not? And this committee will go in deep into the logic and accuracy testing and make recommendations based on existing methods as well as proposed methods. We have a best practices committee, which is kind of out, it includes election best practices, but what I think we can really do is look at the cybersecurity best practices from other industries and start to say, how does that apply here? For example, are we sure that wherever the voting machines are stored, that it's under controlled access, that everybody's had a background check, you know, some of the just blocking and tackling of basic employee vetting. And if that's the case, then are we sure that they're trained to work on it? Are we sure that, you know, things are locked down? Some of the more basic practices of securing this information. But then there's also like understanding that digital daisy chain of how votes travels and all the points of vulnerability. John Robert has done some work around this issue, but it would be great to be able to say, here's how it works today. And then also looking at best practices by other election boards and clerks, both throughout the state and the country. And you can lean on the League of Women Voters Network to be able to do that. Now, as far as we know, we're the only league that's doing a study like this. We had this approved back in May. This has been cooking for a year before that. So even before Russia became a four-letter word here, we've been considering this. So this is an opportunity for your local research to be kind of heard on a national stage, and you can help set some of those best practices, which is really exciting for me. And then finally, we've got public education and messaging. So again, like being able to speak with one voice is really important for the league. And we need people who are experts in communications to be able to get people informed on the issues, coordinating advocacy through the next ledge session and beyond, and just really crafting this so that it lasts longer than the immediate term needs. So, you know, gotta stop using Windows XP machines, gotta run security patches, okay, now what? Like, the public messaging group is really gonna start to figure out how that works. And so if you have experience with policy, or you have experience with, you know, corporate governance, then that could be a really good place for you. And then, of course, there's other committees. So I'm going to come back to this slide. I just want to give 2 more slides here. One is the steps before study adoption. This is very much condensed. But really what it means is that we're introducing this study to one another. We're going to go through and determine our subcommittees and deliverables. We're going to assemble it, we're going to draft it, we're going to present it, we're going to vote on it, we're going to present it, we're going to vote on it. We're going to keep doing that as a cycle until May, in which we're going to put it out to the membership for adoption. So a lot of the work is going to occur in this quarter, from October to December. And then we're going to start to revise through the spring. Each month we're going to have particular milestones, and you can be as involved as you want or as least involved as you want throughout this timeline. There will be continuity, so you can kind of dip in and come out. And I'm going to post this on SlideShare, so you'll have access to all of this information, and I can email it to y'all too. So with that, I'd love to open it up to questions and comments and suggestions for revision. Judith.
When I think of an election machine, I don't think of it as a Windows XP. They're, you know, it's a completely separate device.
It is, yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, is this what we're, you know, putting together a purchase order for? Or are we actually looking at, you know, having voting laptops?
So that's a really good question. I want to be clear that the Windows XP machine is not the voting machine, but it's downstream from the voting machine. So the votes are tallied and then transferred to a machine that runs Windows XP, or at least it did last year in the last logic and accuracy test that we went to. That being said, we're not going so far as to make recommendations for procurement as to what kinds of machines are there. Dan Wallach has already done specifications for what those machines should be. They just haven't been built yet. And the state hasn't moved forward. One of the ways in which the state manages this procurement is they have an approved list of machines. So you got to get on that approved list, and then the counties make their own buying decisions. And it's constrained to the county's budget. So the state doesn't even have an inventory of what the counties are using. Our goal would be more to say, what machines is Harris County using, which we do have an inventory of? Where are their vulnerabilities? And then on that election machines committee, where are we going with this? What are the right technologies to use? How do we ensure security? How do we ensure access? And what are the components that an RFP should include? But I think we would stop short of saying this is the machine that y'all should buy. Yeah. Yes.
Have you guys followed the machines from being voted to the actual vote counts?
Yeah. So there's John Robert has worked on that before, but I believe there's a detailed inventory process of where the machines are at any given time, but there's holes in that. You know, they sit in storage for 11 and a half months out of the year. So are you talking about the machines, the physical machines themselves, or the votes themselves?
The ones that come in, the chips where they come in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want to speak to that?
The machines mostly sit in a warehouse where historically they've not been well protected. For instance, in 2010, they all burned out and had to be replaced. The key thing is the chain of custody for the little cards that have the programming for each election on them. And those little cards are produced on a Windows XP machine. And they go in the voting machine. They're all sealed up. There are various procedures for protecting those from outside interference. And then after the election, there's an elaborate process, chain of custody process for getting them all downtown, where on election night, almost all of them are read. Usually 2 or 3 of them can't be read for some reason, which is a security red flag. But for instance, there's no protocol about what to do when a card is unreadable. There's no security protocol. There's a PR protocol. There's a way to reconstruct it and get some results out. But how a card came to be corrupted is never really thoroughly investigated. So there's been a lot of improvement over the last decade or so in all of this. But our system is way open to an inside hack, someone placed in the county clerk's office who does bad things. It's fairly hard and it's not very efficient for an outsider to interfere. For one thing, there's 1,000 precincts. Why are you going to go all that trouble when you don't have a good chance of affecting him? But a well-placed insider, a mole, whatever, could do great damage, either affecting the outcome of a particular election, probably a small election. A little ambulance district in the suburb that's worth interfering with. You don't have to do much to determine the outcome. And an insider might do that. Somebody working for the Russian insider would want to just throw the whole election into chaos. But the inside hacks are the ones that not just I, but the people in the county clerk's office, there are a lot of conscientious workers there, and that's what they lose sleep over at night.
So the Windows XP machine that is preparing the cards for collecting the votes, is that on the internet or is it off the internet?
That's internet.
It's a freestanding computer. Actually, there are a whole bunch of different software. The most dangerous one is a program called Servo that's on laptops that you can go and plug into things. And I mean, that's the most dangerous machine in this whole thing because it's on a couple of dozen laptops that county employees have access to. All of the media are created on one computer, and all of it is tabulated on 2 computers. Those are at least physically secure. But those laptops with Servo.
John, John, two things, one question, I guess 2 questions. The first question is, when the cartridge has not been readable, the beginning tape and final tape, has there been a case where the beginning tape and final tape were not available?
I'm sure those tapes, these are the printouts that come off the machine at a precinct. I'm sure those have gotten misplaced in some instances, but I don't know a case where the card was unreadable and the votes weren't reconstructed in a way. But truthfully, the tapes are not very important because in any precinct you have votes coming in by mail, you have votes coming out of early voting, and then you have votes cast on election day. So the result of any race has 3 different pathways.
But to your point, not being able to audit why a card was corrupted is a problem.
No, the whole system is fundamentally by design not audited. That's why California, after a while it did its work there, California just said, we're not going to buy. the Hart e-slate system.
And then someplace called
And Hart
Pennsylvania-
stopped making.
Someplace in Pennsylvania did something similar, right?
Well,
You're just saying that for me.
the unauditable systems are still here and there, but by and large, in the last since California took action, nearly all elections now are conducted on a paper ballot that's electronically scanned and tabulated. And when push comes to shove, people can look at the paper ballots. That is a paper audit trail. But here in Harris County, we have the first generation of DRE machines, and they can't be audited in any statistical or complete way. But these glitches, which happen all the time, are not really investigated disinterestedly. They're hastily resolved in what I would describe as a PR exercise. Because the people who tabulate the votes in both parties, they're mostly afraid that what somebody like Dwight's going to say about them the day after the election. So they're very anxious to get a credible looking result in the newspaper. Fast.
The next step, the cartridges are brought back. The cartridges are brought back. I remember what's the thing we went to downtown?
Logic and accuracy.
Logic and accuracy is that the cartridges are brought back. And there was some supposition at the beginning of that a certain system within the software that oversees all that was not being used to transmit via a dedicated line back to the county. But in fact, that it did turn out that was the case, that they used the dedicated line to translate, to send all that data back. And then the cartridges are brought back as a double check on what came off of that dedicated line.
Yeah, the irony of it is, if you watch the closing of an election in a precinct, they print out these little tapes. Ironically, some of the glitches I've seen have come from the fact that a card that was generated for a municipal election in May doesn't get properly reformatted, and it gets used in the next election. And that just causes all sorts of nightmares. I've never seen anything that was provably done with criminal intent or really much effect. We've managed to resolve the close elections to the satisfaction of both sides. We've not had an election contest that challenged the machinery. So, but as I say, it's hair raising. It was always hair raising, but now that you have people out there, who work for the Russian military, now that makes all this real scary. There are much more dangerous people fiddling with this stuff than I ever imagined.
At any point in time in the handling of the cards, are there any contractors involved, or is it all
In Harris County, there's no contractors involved. In most of the other little counties in Texas, the county clerk does not have the expertise to really handle the electronic system. So they bring in consultants to run the elections. And the worst thing I've ever seen was when I was a recount master in Zapata County, which since 1948 has been the source of legendary election problems in Texas. And when they first started using the electronic machines, it was just a fiasco. And the whole election, the judge reversed the results of the primary election and forced it to be run again. The contractor system is a real problem here in Texas where you have Harris County, which is extremely proficient and has the resources of the 27th largest state, which is what Harris County is. On the other hand, you've got counties in Texas that have the same responsibilities and powers as Harris County, but the resources of a rinky-dink municipal utility district. So it's.
I also want to add to that, that from a procurement standpoint, the county is, Harris County is particularly peculiar in that they've centralized their IT procurement, and this falls under that. So it's not necessarily the county clerk that's doing the procurement. The county clerk is making recommendations to IT services, central IT services, to then go out and purchase certain equipment. And sometimes those purchases are lumped together with other things. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that was where I was kind of, you know, I didn't want to lose the question.
Yeah, no, please go ahead.
But this study is one of the goals of this study, since, you know, we're not really talking about procurement, but
Dan Wallach talks a lot about procurement in his research.
right. But the thing is, it's like, you know, we don't want to say, well, no, buy this, don't buy, buy machine X, don't buy.
Right.
But what we can do is just like you were saying, you know, one suggestion, don't use Windows XP machines, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, kind of go a little further than that and say, this is a technology baseline
Yes.
that we certify as secure for use in election machines. Doesn't matter, you know, we evaluate, come up with a version, find out versions of Linux, Mac OS, Windows, you know, different OSs, networking protocols and topologies. You know, this is how you implement secure election technology. We come up with that. Then now you've got a recommendation. How they implement it is up to them. But if they, you know, you're not making it. They can go and procure things the way that they want.
Right.
But if you want to have secure elections, you need to build according to this pattern.
And I think if we get that prescriptive with the technology, then built into the study should be a review of that study every year because of the rapid evolution of security and technology. I think what's great about this particular, our niche in advocacy on this front, is that a lot of the technical research is done for us. We're not going to break new ground being like, oh, we need to vote on the blockchain. Nope, like we don't need to. John has some good comments on that. But one thing that we can do is assemble those best practices, translate it for the layman, translate it for the average voter, not average, translate it for all voters, and give them a vocabulary to advocate for it. So I think we can get that prescriptive, but in part and parcel with that is we have to maintain it.
Maintain it, yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
When you have periods of voting that can extend, you know, for weeks, it's not just a matter of taking out the machines on one day and then putting them back in storage. What happens at the end of the day? Do the machines get tallied, or do they get turned off,
Get moved.
reset? I'm wondering if right now, is there some kind of standard procedure that happens between, you know, one day and the next?
So I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that the county clerk's office has pledged their full assistance. So has the tax assessor and collector. So we can ask them and we can meet with them and we can get answers to these questions and document it and publish it.
Now back to her question on the contractors. I think that is a place is that the techs that repair the machines and swap them out and so forth. I think there are a lot of contractors in that process.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And so the contractor could have access to the cartridge when the person at the pole takes the cartridge out and says, here, take this and put it in the new machine. he has access.
I bring it up because all of those really, really super big hacks have involved contractors. So that's a real big security problem, just simply having access.
I completely agree, and so from my perspective, I would think what we can do is outline the full process and then draw little red arrows into those points of vulnerability. So if we know that a contractor is doing X, Y, and Z, then we focus in on those pieces of the process.
Yeah, one other question that I had, it's actually kind of a two-pronged question. The first thing was it was about the cards, right? The cards are programmed with the format for the election. Sometimes the cards don't work. So when the cards are programmed, are they tested?
Yes, they do.
Oh, okay.
And when we say the cards don't work, it's not like the cards don't work 10% of the time. The cards don't work pretty rarely. I don't know the exact number, but
okay.
You tell me.
Yeah, three or four people are sitting in a room.
Well, they're
about half the size of this room.
in a general election. A general election entails 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10,000 cards. So, and it only takes one. And you know, each card typically has from 0 to thousands of votes on it. And it only takes a glitch with 1 or 2 cards in order to send everybody in the central counting station on election night into a, cold sweat.
That's a big problem, that you have to have like a 0 failure rate is a really big problem.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Well, those are the kinds of things that we can advocate for after study to say these cards should never fail. No vote should be lost.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's a standard thing. Things will fail, so you have to have a backup system available.
Well, the system we have stores votes in 3 different places. So there is a routine for reconstructing the votes if the card fails. Okay. However, when a card fails, that's all that's done. The votes are reconstructed. There isn't much in the way of an investigation as to why the card failed.
And to your point,
The problem with a hack is it's more likely to just mess up a card than it is to actually change the outcome of an election. But the idea of investigating the possibility of an intrusion instead of just reconstructing the votes and getting it to the press. I mean, I've had that argument a dozen times and lost every time.
and if the objective is to sow chaos, if the objective is simply to make people break out into a cold sweat and doubt the validity of the system, then a few failing cards, even if the votes are recoverable, is enough to do that.
And the hack that was either on 60 Minutes or Frontline, where they had the voters in the room and they took the cards and everybody voted according to a pre-prescribed method, and then the results were not the results that they had voted on from those cards. And this is the Diebold system. That's potential. I mean, that's not going to show up, and if it's not going to show up as a failure in the card. And if that failure is not in the card, then there's not going to be an audit.
As a matter of fact, the logic and accuracy test takes the form of pre-printed votes being recorded on paper and recorded electronically and then matched against each other where they should match exactly. In fact, performing that test on our incredibly complicated ballots, we're never able to do it completely correctly, but we do have a process that's developed in this county of finding out why something doesn't match and attributing it to a human error. I mean, marking a ballot, you would think you could, I'll just mark it. No, people make mistakes doing that. And then when they take the paper ballot and try to reproduce it on the little screen, they make mistakes again. So there's enough room for innocent human error to make uh, that kind of test something that's hard to pull off perfectly.
But that's a nuanced argument too. That's a way of, and that's part of this group's charge is how do you communicate that 100% isn't necessarily, you know, what the goal should be, 100% accuracy, considering there's always elements of human error in it.
Is it feasible to do a sample size test and audit that? So for example, to take a chip and, whenever you're deployed for the election, have a sample precinct set up with where you put in votes and check, what's the outcome of the other end.
Yeah, so we were talking about parallel testing yesterday, in addition to the logic and accuracy test, which basically does just that. You vote, and then you vote again. You vote on paper, and then you enter it into the machine, and you check between the two. And if you do enough of those, say like 1,000, you can make it statistically significant.
The other question I had about all of the different machines, from what I understand, they just go to storage in between elections, right?
Mm-hmm.
In preparing the machines for an election, are they like wiped totally clean?
I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, and not just the air gap computers that they get the votes from. I mean, the dog vote machines and everybody, all the voting machines and everything. Are they? Because that's the thing, right?
In all probability, the answer is no.
No,
But we should ask the county clerk that question. And
Yeah.
what are the procedures by which? What are your IT procedures to ready these machines for an election?
Right.
How do you go back? I mean, does your company wipe your machine when they give it to a new staff analyst and you get your laptop upgrade? Probably not.
Oh, no,
Even though they should. Oh, your company does because you run your
guys. Yeah.
But I looked at Meredith here, who works for a big oil and gas company. Who knows?
Well, that's a real problem. The cards have to be wiped. The machines
Should be
have
wiped.
to be wiped. There's thousands
what
of
level do you wipe?
cards, thousands and hundreds of machines, and dozens of people doing that work, and it's not done perfectly. I've seen machines that were reused without being properly wiped, and cards that were reused, but there was never any evidence that there was anything deliberate about it. It's just that elections are very large, and the best orchestra has a flutist, violinist with a string across. I mean, perfection is not something that happens in elections.
Will any consideration be given to shortening the time intervals between purchases and centralizing the processes for procurement of the voting machines?
I think so. I think that those are things that would fall under the election machines committee, and certainly getting a handle on what the procurement rules are currently and where we should go with them, because I know that we're way behind on a procurement cycle right now, and the favorite line of all government is we have no money, we can't do it. So I think that that's something that we can thoroughly investigate.
And also the vendor thing you mentioned.
Yeah, so I have a list
The
of
vendors are way ahead of time. And then the actual process, I think we're lagging like at least 3 years.
At least.
Before every election with what the state says that the counties must do. So the state will say now what is to be done in the 2020 election.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Sarah will say, oh, I have a lot of time to work on this one.
So I completely agree, and timing those cycles, making sure that the state has an inventory of what the counties are using, because how can the state issue a directive when they don't even know what machines every county is using? That's right. So they literally have to go to the counties and ask them, and they have a survey that they send out every couple of years. What's your inventory? And it's an optional survey. So they don't have complete information either. So how can you possibly make a technology policy decision without knowing the inventory of what you're working with? Yes, sir.
So are there being comparisons made with respect to the cybersecurity and the technology at a national level? And beyond that, would you even go further to see what's happening abroad and make comparisons between how elections are done and what machinery is used and what sort of issues they face in different countries? Is that something that might take place?
Yes, it absolutely can. The thing to know about elections is that constitutionally they're locally administered. So it's standardizing a process across the country, standardizing even a process across the state is very hard to do. It's up to the individual jurisdiction to determine what works best for them. And as a result, what we have to do is find all the best practices and figure out how that fits together like a puzzle to say, you know, for example, and this is way out there, but let's say Harris County started to experiment with ranked choice voting. What are the best practices for, you know, which is a totally different way of voting, you know, for your person. You start to rank them 1, 2, 3, 4, then you have a runoff automatically. What are the implications for that? What are the ways in which you run an election like that? So I think that understanding how different machines are configured for different types of democracies is really helpful. And then borrowing the pieces that make the most sense for how Harris County runs their elections is something that we can advocate. Yes, John.
I think the most useful thing on this list is public education and messaging. In a term I've heard Jeff use that I've not thought of before, and that's the term vocabulary. There are lots of things about elections that are utterly unresolved. Things that Hamilton and Jefferson argued about, people are still arguing about them, and they haven't been resolved. And how you conduct elections in a little small square Texas county and how you do it in Harris County, which is as big as the 27th largest state, that's just a huge logistical problem. All I can, the most important thing I see is having a standard vocabulary where people who disagree either about principles or facts can at least engage each other intelligently instead of talking past each other, and also avoid the worst thing possible, which is the obscurity of the election process means that it's surrounded by suspicion, and during elections, the amount of rumor mongering is simply incredible. The least little glitch in the election, which now runs, the campaign and elections now run about 3 weeks at the same time. A machine comes unplugged in Sunnyside, and 400 people are on the phone claiming the election's collapsing, you know, for 2 weeks. So the rumor mongering is terribly dangerous in my opinion, because at the end of the day, half the candidates are going to lose. And they need to be able to accept the outcome. And when elections completely lose public confidence, that's when you get a civil war. So it's really important to have a vocabulary and trusted places like this where people are talking intelligently instead of past each other and not running home, getting on the phone and just, you know, exaggerating what was probably a tiny little problem.
Any other questions?
I have just a quick question. I don't know very much about the equipment, but I know about vulnerabilities and testing. And so, a little bit. Are they Wi-Fi capable at all?
No.
No? Okay, because there was just announced yesterday a huge
WPA2.
WPA2.
There's no Wi-Fi involved at any level in recording votes or tabulating them.
For the current machines.
Even the machines in the county clerk's office, they're all hardwired. There's no Wi-Fi
But
anything.
what about future machines? We're talking about pyramids. What
Well,
about this next generation?
The future machine that I'm aware of, which is the Wallach Star vote system, doesn't have any Wi-Fi either. So now, the voter registration databases, on the other hand, are subject to every conceivable vulnerability I can possibly imagine. Moreover, they're hideously centralized. The simple fact is, every single voter registration in the United States goes from a county to a state to Equifax. I mean, it's a very complicated, obscure system, but way up at the top, there's something, a transaction called a live check. And that is a check against, in theory, the three, but actually I think only Equifax of the three credit bureaus. So everything that can go wrong with credit bureaus is going wrong with voter registration.
Right, so also my next concern with that, with databases, that sort of thing, is what happened in Chicago. That 1.8 million voters in the registrations were exposed. 1.8 million of registered voters, that's huge. You know,
In our,
this is and it had to do with cloud storage procedures, so.
that happened
Yeah.
in the voter ID litigation here in Texas. The Attorney General of Texas exposed 1.2 million of those records. So,
Good job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look,
Kinpax is very efficient.
The worst problems I can imagine arise in the voter registration chain, and I mean, if I was a major general in the Russian army, that's where I would be that's what I would be targeting for maximum disruption.
Well, if you want to sow doubt in the system, all you have to do is say that somebody's registered in 4 different places and that they're showing up 4 different ways to vote.
Or I mean, because
Dead people are registered.
But that's okay. I mean, dead people should be registered. We should purge those roles, but dead people shouldn't be voting.
Well,
and I think that that's where the vocabulary and the nuance really comes into play. And securing registered voter or voter registration information is all part of this. It's part of the election cybersecurity. And maybe that's something that we need to create a committee for, or change the election machines committee into more of a machines plus, data security.
If you work early voting, or if you're a poll watcher in early voting, if you go to West Gray and you sit there for an hour and a half, you'll see at least one person turn purple and get extremely angry because there's some glitch in their voter registration. And our election process disturbs, and I've actually done statistics of it. I mean, 1 or 2 people trying to vote get extremely angry. And in this state, they're not supposed to have a pistol.
Not supposed to have a cell phone either.
Or a cell phone.
No.
I mean, it would be worthwhile to think of the voters and their comfort and respect for the process instead of what we invest in, making sure that incumbents are happy with the results. Who cares? I mean, the whole point of an election is to make elected officials extremely nervous and threatened.
Because they report to the voter.
Now, the question about Wi-Fi was, I talked about a dedicated line earlier, and I worked in Cook County, but I haven't worked with the machines here. But the machines there, once you got down to the point where you're tabulating all the votes, you pulled up an antenna, and that antenna would here go to Central Technology Services controlled radio towers. And I'm not sure if our machines have that.
No, Our system involves a chain of custody, just like evidence going to the police line. I mean, from, there are myriad safe seals, tamper-proof tape, logs, this, that, and the other. We treat the cast vote records like, actually, I think we treat them better than banks treat money.
Right, and the backup was treated that way, but that dedicated line that's going out first, so if you have to audit, there is a backup. But if you don't, if you never audit, there's that dedicated line, and then in Cook County, there was the radio tower.
Well, that's actually a really good point that I hadn't thought about for this study, which is, I recall in the 2016 election, we ran out of time. The American people ran out of time to recount votes in close states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin because the process of recount was so difficult and distributed amongst different counties. Different counties have different redundancy systems. So I think figuring out ways in which you could do a rapid recount is well within the scope of shoring up election cybersecurity in the event there is some suspicious activity. Being able to quickly spin up that backup and understand what it's saying is especially helpful. Yes?
The greatest amount of voter fraud is not in people coming into the polls and having false IDs. It's the mail-in ballots. You have a lot of mail-in ballots coming from nursing homes where you've got people that are unconscious and from detention centers. I don't know exactly how that works. But whenever you see an election that basically gets won by the mail-in ballots and a lot of them are coming from the same nursing homes, that's when you start to have a problem. And that's what's rampant with regard to that in Texas. I wanted to kind of jump topics on cybersecurity to another aspect of the voting process, which is whenever you're doing your research and looking at candidates. So here in Harris County, we have, let me think, was it 86 district judges that we're supposed to vote for, something like that. And so at any point in time, you'll have, maybe 40 that are on the ballot. And so you sit down and you're doing your research trying to figure out are these people qualified or not. And what I found whenever I was doing research for 2016 was that 2 of the judges' websites had been taken over by ransomware. So we have another problem, which is because information is not, sent. And whenever I went to UCLA and whenever I voted in elections out there, we had this booklet that got sent in the mail, and it had all the election information you could possibly need on it. It had everything on people's statements and what their backgrounds were, and it had everything on there. And you don't have anything like that here in Texas. You've got to go out and do the research, and that can be roughly an hour race. So you count that up pretty quick, but it really doesn't help whenever on top of that, the candidates themselves are, trying to run this really tight budget race, and then they go to, their best friend's, buddy who happens to have some computer skills to help set up the website, and then suddenly, it gets attacked.
So one thing that the League of Women Voters of the Houston area does do, although we didn't do it for this particular election because it was too small and we didn't have a big enough budget, we put together the voters guide every year, or every major election year. And we ask general questions to all the candidates and we print their words in response. If they have typos, we print the typos. And this is an editorial dialogue that we have to say, how do we represent this? We also do a series called Conversations with the Candidates on Houston Media Source, public television, where we come up with a slate of questions to ask the candidates, and we just ask them and we let them respond in their own words. And it's designed to uncover how much they know about the office they're running for and what their positions are on kind of the important things of the day. So I think that the League does do a part in trying to help in a nonpartisan way inform people. But when you have 85 judges running, that's when the American Bar Association is
And they don't
helpful.
cover them all. And
No, they don't.
The other thing is that if you're going to really evaluate people, you need to know what is their education, what is their experience. And a lot of these people, whenever they go to produce their own web pages, they skip over that part so they
Yeah.
can just tell you why they're running. So you have no idea if they're qualified or not.
But the reality is that, you know, it really just depends on what party they're running for and what the cycle of politics is, because, you know, in this past election cycle, Harris County went 13 points blue, and a lot of Democrat first-time judges were elected, ousting many qualified and decent Republican judges. And I think that, you know, affects things just as much as their ability to talk about what they're going to do. Sometimes you have highly qualified candidates losing to completely unqualified candidates simply because they're in the wrong party at the wrong time. Yes.
You had mentioned that you expect and that you've been told you'll have cooperation from both the tax assessor and the county clerk.
Yes.
Are they going to let you actually walk the process through on the upcoming election night in November? Will you have people there who are kind of following along and watching the process?
We'll soon see. John, Robert, have you done any of the election monitoring work for the league before?
No, not for the league. I've done it, but I'm a partisan figure. I have I don't have the trust from both sides that the league has.
The short answer is we're going to ask, and we'll find out. We'll see how much they want to open the doors, so to speak. But I don't see why they wouldn't, and they were very, very open-armed in embracing this, and you know, eager to share what they're doing to secure the election.
There's a certain points in the election process, tiny periods, where both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, the two parties nominating by primary election, get to both appoint, in effect, counterparts, and we can go through everything. But that's just a few weeks in the process. When that period is over, and you know, the only way I got to see stuff was when I had my Republican counterpart, and we would go arm in arm through everything.
Yeah.
But that's a very temporary thing. When the election is over, the only way to discover anything is to file a lawsuit.
Yes.
I think that there's something to take away from a lot of what you're saying is that there's no evidence at all of malice anywhere through and through in the elections, and anything you've seen or anything anyone has ever observed. I think like there was a theory when Obama got elected that it was dead Mexicans voting for him, and now there's a theory that Trump got elected that it's Russian intelligence that was voting for him, and outside of the sphere of electoralism, where it's now acceptable to come up and conjure these theories without any evidence whatsoever, these were always tinfoil hat ideas. I'm not saying you can't engineer a better system, you certainly can, but I think that we're losing something entirely in the critique by pretending like any of this is going to solve a problem that we don't yet have. Government is unresponsive and it sucks, and it has nothing to do right now with technology. So there's a lot of people who have lost faith in democracy in America, and especially under this absolutely shitty system we've got. But when people come to me and they say, you know, they express these types of concerns, the media plays up on it. And I'll tell you right now, I got a message on Facebook yesterday from the Wall Street Journal asking me about a Blacktivist account to tell you how pervasive now these theories have become. They want to interview me on an account that posted inside of one of my local in Houston political groups, which has now been linked to Moscow through some harebrained scheme. But I think that when people come to me and they ask, you know, as a member of, you know, Houston's tech scene, what do I think about the security in the election systems? I always say, look, it's absolutely shit. There's no disputing that. It's flawed in every which way. People are worried about all kinds of things that have no relevance to security, and they're missing the big things that I think are certainly more valid than security arguments, or you could make that argument. But it's not at all to blame for anything that they're experiencing in their daily life. You know, and the reality was, I think Trump won an election because of political reasons, won the primary because of political reasons, and it's because the Republican Party is, for all intents, screwed. And the same thing is true on the Democratic Party. You know, they argue now that they can elect their candidate in a cigar-filled back room, and that's a direct quote in the NC lawsuit. So I have a real hard time like getting enthusiastic about fixing what is thus far a non-problem.
Well,
I don't think we should lose sight of that the system is broken right now, and we have no reason to believe that it is at all related to voting.
So it's complicated, right? When we talk about Russian interference, we're actually talking about a couple of different things. In this particular study, what we're focused on is the election process and the mechanics of that, to which you're right. There's been no evidence that's surfaced that any votes were tampered. Obviously, there's a PR element to that. And obviously, it takes a lot longer for anything that revelatory to surface in the press. But as of now, there's no reason to believe that any votes were cast improperly or that Russians were voting or anything like that. But there is reason to believe that, and this is just the ongoing conversation, if we're recording this for posterity, this is the moment in time in October 2017, that Russian-funded ad brokers were buying ads and trying to suppress the vote through disinformation campaigns, which is a totally separate process around sowing chaos and getting people to be disillusioned about democracy. What I think is really important around focusing on the technology process in this particular study is to clarify exactly what you're talking about, to show that votes aren't being tampered with, and if they are, then we should come clean about it and fix it, and B, show where we're leaving the doors unlocked, and how can we secure that so that it's not going to happen, and how can we use this as a moment in time to shore up our security and ensure that that doesn't happen. So again, in this study, we're not looking for aha moments. We're not looking for big research breakthroughs. We're not looking for the big gotcha moment. What we are trying to do is clarify, as John would say, a very obscure process and make it more accessible for the everyday voter to understand and to have faith in.
I will say this: if there was anything out of this that would get me excited about, participating in creating a technological solution for a political problem. And I'd say there's a lot of social problems that are just involved in electoralism. Gerrymandering would be a great one. The fact that it's first past defense post voting, for those who understand different voting systems, that plays into this politics of fear, which I think is a gigantic problem. But I would like to see something that was more about bypassing representatives entirely for the purposes of actually getting a referendum or a consensus amongst communities and populations. The whole concept of referendums, in my opinion, is the most pure thing we have in the voting system.
Have you been to California?
California.
Yeah, but I mean, like here, we talk about these types of things where we have like problems with, bozos like Trump getting elected, who don't represent what I feel is the majority of America. But on issues that are even pretty salient, like the food sharing ordinance in Houston, let's speak locally in Houston, Mayor Parker shut it down. She denied the people of Houston the right to have their voices heard in a referendum on the food sharing ordinance. We submitted 26,000 signatures. Democracy is broken because the Democrats fucked it. It had nothing to do with technology.
Well, I want to take a step back here because I think this is a good conversation for one of our unit discussion meetings that we have every month, and would be good to have as a topic to understand the disillusionment in democracy and why we're failed by our elected officials and we're failed by our two major parties. I think that we can agree on that. In this particular case, on the Harris County Cybersecurity study, it's got a limited scope in that regard precisely because it's consensus driven. So we had to come up with a study proposal that we had to propose to the membership at our annual meeting. You kind of get one swing of the bat each year to get the membership to approve something. So we got them to approve the study in May, and now we're kind of following that chain, and here we are in October, kind of getting off the ground. But your point, as I hear it, is that this is a lot more dynamic than just strictly the technology components to it, that our disillusionment in democracy, our collective disillusionment in democracy, has a lot of roots to it and a lot of insidious players and actors, and that we need to further unpack each of those in their own way. Now, what I will say is that as a league meeting, I do have to say we have to be respectful as much as possible to the parties, whether or not they deserve it. But that being said, as long as we're all okay with that.
I agree. That was right out of place.
No, you're fine.
But let's
I mean, my suggestion would be that the purview of whatever we're doing to audit the voting should extend to actually direct representation on issues that are substantial to people in the community, and that we should have an automatic method or an automated method that doesn't involve bureaucrats to get things on as a referendum, approved as a referendum, and then to actually get some form of consensus. And that to me would be the gold mine, where you would actually have some form of representation.
I'm just gonna pop in really quick and say that I run a political action committee, and Russia increasingly became a problem within what we're non-ideological, non-partisan, but Russia increasingly became a problem over the years from the primary through the election. And I have it all documented on my website if you'd like to see it. So, in my opinion, we are absolutely under attack by Russia. If they can find a way into our system, they will, and this is a very important work that this whole process is.
So I agree with you, and Evan, to your point, I think that what we can do is through the election machine technology, get a better understanding of the ways in which referendums are added to the ballot. But I think that as a study component, that might merit its own discussion and merit its own kind of democracy health index to better understand if you have 26,000 signatures, why isn't it on the ballot? That's its own question. And it intersects with this for sure, but I would encourage you to come to a league meeting, join the league, number one, come to a unit discussion meeting, we'll make that a topic and we'll explore it in detail, and then that can lead, because we're so deliberative, because we're set up much like the US government, you plant the seed in one place and then it just kind of keeps building on it. So I think your point is well taken and valid. Randy.
No, I don't want to say she, but what is your name?
Oh, Liz.
Liz.
Hey Liz.
So Liz brought up the point that is sort of outside of this, but it's the point that the League of Women Voters Voters Guide. Is that the proper terminology for
Yes.
that document that I've been trusting for years and years and years? Is being replaced by Ballotpedia and others like that. And that may be another unit discussion.
I think so too.
Is that what you were talking about at UCLA, we had here for years and years and years. It's called the League of Women Voters.
Well, we have our discussions on the board about whether or not we should go completely digital, whether or not we should print the guide, whether or not we should translate it to Spanish. All of these are cost concerns and time concerns. And given the bandwidth that our volunteers have and given the budget that we work with, we try and make decisions based on that. But whenever we err on the side of doing more, they're gone. They're taken. People want it, people use it. So I think there's still quite an appetite for it, despite Ballotpedia, or, you know, each of the parties put out their own voters' guides. I think there's still a role for the League of Women Voters to put out a nonpartisan guide. But I would say that if that's a passion of yours, or if that's something that you're interested in, again, I invite you to volunteer and help us solve some of these intractable problems of how do we pay for it, how do we assemble it. It's a lot of work. I've never done it. My hands are baby in that regard, like they're nice and non-callous, but that's serious hard work. Frank.
Would electoral literacy be a good term for if that sort of came up, that League of Women's Voters has been doing for decades?
Yes.
And can that help us minimize the impact of the partisan interest in magnifying every possible error? And like you were saying, one card, there's a problem, one card that becomes magnified, machine is unplugged or something like that.
Well, I think that there's a couple of different levels of sophistication when it comes to what you would say electoral literacy. This study is really designed for the journalists in the room, the auditors in the room, the people who run PACs, people who have day-to-day experience with this, who want more insight into what the government's doing. And it's not that the government's doing anything nefarious, it's that it's our right as citizens to know and to provide a check on the government to make sure that they're doing things properly. I think what you're talking about is kind of a less sophisticated version of that, which is how do I vote? You know, how do I cast a ballot? Who am I voting for? How do I prepare that ballot? Where do I go? Those are all fundamental questions that I think play into electoral literacy and that are much more widespread and have a much wider audience, because voting's not easy. I mean, if you voted, most of you probably voted in Texas, it's a challenge. I'm a pretty smart guy, and I'm on the board of the League of Women Voters, and I still struggle with how to vote. Maybe I'm not that smart of a guy, but I still struggle. Any other questions? What I would like to invite you to do is either come talk to me. We don't have a ton of time. They close at 8 o'clock, so we've got about 10 more minutes left. But if you want to get involved, email me. I'm available 24/7. I don't sleep, I just drink coffee. So I would love to have you involved in a committee. And yeah, we're going to march right through this, and it's going to be notable, impactful work. So I invite you to join us. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, we really good.